Good morning, everyone. I was going to try to do a little bit of a video this morning about the Olivet prophecy. I may do several of them, and I hope that you will enjoy them. I hope they'll be a blessing to you. Um, I need to jump right into my thoughts. Recently, I saw a video posted to one of the groups on Facebook. It was a YouTube video by a guy by the name of Joel Sexton, if I'm saying that correctly. Excuse me. And Joel essentially, in his video, says if the Olivet prophecy is about the fall of Jerusalem, then all prophecy is fulfilled. I typically have a background in formal logic and the science of knowledge, philosophy, and I don't like to overstep false dichotomies, which I feel like Joel's kind of setting up there. But I wanted to use that as a kind of stepping stone or a segue into the idea of the importance of what the focus of the Olivet prophecy is. I think very often um, it's assumed that the main focus of the Olivet prophecy is the fall of Jerusalem. As a matter of fact, if you'd asked me probably 4 or 5 years ago, what is the purpose of what is the point of the Olivet prophecy, I would have said it is the fall of Jerusalem. That's what we're dealing with in the Olivet prophecy. And I certainly think that that is part of the scope of the discussion there. Certainly, there are prophetic predictions made that relate to the fall of Jerusalem. Um, and this has been known by Christians since the earliest times. But if you were to ask me today, what is the point of the Olivet discourse, the Olivet prophecy, I would not today tell you that it is the fall of Jerusalem. And allow me for maybe perhaps the next few moments to explain to you um, why that's the case. If you go in the every one of the Olivet discourses where it's recorded in the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they begin with the same introduction, and that is that the disciples are in Jerusalem and they are enamored, they're overwhelmed by the brightness and the glory of the city of Jerusalem. And in each of these discourses, this sets up the following statements of the Olivet discourse, Olivet prophecy. In Matthew, particularly, this section of the gospel directly follows Matthew 23, where Christ has just had a intense showdown with the rulers of the Jews, the scribes, the Pharisees. I mean, this is the OK Corral of the gospel. This is where Christ stands them down, and he's right there on the precipice in Matthew's gospel of being betrayed and crucified. So this is it. This is the line drawn. And if you read Matthew 23, you can see this. And Christ is here, and he's contending with the scribes, the Pharisees, and this segues into the opening of Matthew 24. And it is right after this, right after Christ condemns them to the utmost for their unbelief, and compares them and groups them with those who shed the blood of the prophets, with all the wicked generations. And he just groups these guys together and says, you are the epitome of this. And it's right after this, and that I'm leaving your house desolate to you, and I will not return to you until you say, blessed is he that comes in the name of the Lord. And it is right after this that the disciples are bouncing around Jerusalem like a bunch of tourists, and they're just overwhelmed by all the hustle and bustle and the bright lights of Jerusalem. And it is to this that Christ, almost in frustration, rebukes them or blurts out almost, do you see all these buildings? I'm telling you, not one stone will be left on top of another that won't be thrown down. You can feel the frustration. He's just, and they've just totally missed the point. As typically they are portrayed as doing in the Gospels. And so this builds to this point, and it is at that point that the disciples are literally almost slapped across the face. They're shocked. They don't know what to do with this statement. I'm going to make a quick point here and read the passage for yourself. I'm assuming most people are familiar with this discourse, but they've completely missed the point here. They don't understand what's happening, and their attitude is disturbing to Christ. Now, it is this point when they respond that typically full preterists, perhaps even partial preterists or different views, will have the disciples switch from naive disciples to detailed theologians with systematic theologies under their arm and this deep theological question. Um, and I think that's simply a mistake. It's clear that they don't really know what's going on. And I think that their question is a question similar to that of when they see the transfiguration. They don't know what to do with what they've just been handed. They don't know how to process the information. And that is the ground of their question. What are you talking about? When will these things be? What is the sign of your coming in the end of the age? And I think that they, full preterists will say, well, what they're meaning is, what is the end of the age of the Mosaic Law? I don't think they're thinking that deeply. If we're thinking that way, then why would they have been enamored and so enthusiastic about Jerusalem if they knew Jerusalem was about to fall, or if they anticipated something to this degree? No, they're asking about the end of the world. They're asking of the end of the ages. They're asking about the end of time as we know it. Whether that is what is about to happen or not is a matter of discussion. And I think as we look through the chapter, I think Christ does correct this, but he does not, and this is where I want to get to, he does not immediately address their first question about when is this going to happen, and neither does he address their assumption about what it means. The first thing he does, and this is kind of to the point of where I want to kind of discuss in this video, the first thing he does is he addresses them from pastoral concern. His response to them has nothing to do with the time of the fall of Jerusalem. It has nothing to do with the end of the world or the end of time. He does not correct any assumption. If they assume that it's the end of the world, he does not say, I'm not talking about the end of the world. Or he doesn't say, I'm talking about the fall of Jerusalem. He doesn't get, his next statement doesn't directly address their primary concern. It addresses his primary concern as their pastor and the shepherd of their souls. And he says, take heed that no man deceive you. Now, what has just happened? He's just had the showdown with the scribes and the Pharisees and the rulers of the people. And here they are, they're enamored. What is his response? Take heed that no man deceive you. For many are going to come in my name and say, I'm Christ. And he goes on to describe, he said, you're going to be hated. People are going to persecute you. They're going to follow you from city to city. Brother will turn against brother. You're going to be hated of all nations for my name's sake. And then he comes to the end of this, and he talks about this whole period of time, and this is directly addressing the apostles. And this is important because the bulk of his answer after the question, up until probably very close to around the 34th verse in the 24th chapter, and I don't have the Bible in front of me to exactly grab the verse, but look at it yourself. The bulk of his answer deals with a pastoral concern for them that they're not deceived, and they realize the cost of discipleship. And they realize that following him does not mean you're going to get glory and riches and people are going to love you. It means right the opposite. They're going to crucify you. They're going to kill you. They're going to persecute you, and they're going to hate you. Okay? And then he follows this, and I think this is significant. I don't want to get into it specifically here. But he follows it by this phrase, and immediately after the tribulation of those days. Okay? Now, this is important, and I hope that perhaps I'll be able to get to it maybe in a later video. I want to maybe do some of these, the Lord willing, to kind of discuss this, because I think the purpose of the Olivet Discourse, and I think that the nature of it has been assumed and misunderstood and stepped over by many in eschatology and in full preterism, partial preterism, whatever. We need to go back to the drawing board on Matthew 24, because I think this is where many of us have made a wrong turn. It's where I made a wrong turn. And he says, immediately after the tribulation of those days. Now, I'm going to ask this, and I'm trying to hasten along. We'll get this under around 10 minutes per video. But the question at this point is, whose tribulation is he describing? If we make the full preterist and perhaps partial preterist assumption, or let's just put it this way, if we make the assumption that the purpose of this is to talk about the fall of Jerusalem, then the tribulation of those days pertains to the fall of Jerusalem. But I would say he has not described the fall of Jerusalem to that point. He's described what? The persecution and the tribulation of the disciples. Look in the Revelation. These are they that came out of great tribulation. Whose tribulation? Immediately after what tribulation? The tribulation of those days. the persecution, the distress. Christ says in another place, in this world you will have tribulation, but do not fear, for I have overcome the world. Okay. Now I will say this, and I'm going to try to wrap this up very quickly. I don't have a major problem with a interpretation of some of the next following verses that deal with perhaps the spreading of the gospel. I think there's I think when it transitions into more of a prophetic imagery, the imagery of prophecy, I think a lot of times that is dealing with larger scopes than and it's intended to give a bigger picture than they can be crystallized into just straightforward language. That's the reason that type of language is used in prophecy. If I'm making any sense there, and I'll try to cover that in more detail later. So in other words, I'm not dismissive of the idea that maybe the sending of the angels to gather the elect has a connection to the spreading of the gospel. But I would say that if we realize that the tribulation that's being spoken about, and if we realize what Christ is describing there is not the fall of Jerusalem, but he's talking about the tribulation that the disciples endure and will have to endure, then the next phrase, immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened and the moon, it reevaluates how we have to address those passages. And I'm going to talk about that later. But in summary, I don't think the Olivet discourse is primarily about the fall of Jerusalem. I think the fall of Jerusalem is a tool and a vehicle for Christ to pastor his disciples about the cost of discipleship. And that this prophecy about the fall of Jerusalem will become very important to them because it will vindicate the words of Christ when they are in the midst of this tribulation and persecution. And if you study Christian history, Christian persecution and tribulation did not end in 70 AD. It did not end. If anything, it may have got worse because at that time the Romans could not distinguish between the Jews and the Christians. So Christian tribulation didn't end in 70 AD. What did happen in 70 AD is the first of many enemies of Christ fell, and the church endured, and it endures to this day. And with that, I say glory to Jesus Christ. Have a wonderful and blessed day, and hope to talk to you again soon. Thank you.